In the early AD century, India and the West referred to Southeast Asia as the Golden Kersones, Golden Land, and it wasn't long after that the region became famous for its pepper and tropical forest products. Initially aromatic wood and resin, and later among the finest and rarest spices. From the 7th to the 10th centuries, Arabs and Chinese thought about gold in Southeast Asia, as well as spices. Sailors from ports on the Atlantic Ocean in the 15th century attempted to sail through the unknown oceans of the opposite hemisphere to find these spice islands. They all know that Southeast Asia is the center of spices in the world. From about 1000 AD until the industrial era of the 19th century, all world trade was more or less regulated by the ebb and flow of spices out of Southeast Asia. Throughout this century, the region and its products have never lost their superior quality. Coconut trees, long beaches, steep mountain slopes covered in lush vegetation, brilliantly colored birds and flowers, and tropical sunsets of orange and gold have fascinated visitors and their own people for centuries. It is reported that in the last years of the 16th century Dutch ships first arrived on one of the islands in the Indonesian archipelago. The entire crew disembarked from the ship, and it took their captain 2 years to assemble them for the return journey to the Netherlands. In international trade by land and sea, several major empires have been involved. At the western end of the caravan route, land and sea, known as the Silk Road, was the Roman Empire, which at that time included areas throughout the Mediterranean, Egypt, the Levant and Arabia. From there the trade route moved eastward through the Parthia and Kushan kingdoms in Central Asia and northern India, through the lands of Shaka, Indo-Scythia, and Shatavahana in northern and central India, to the kingdoms of South India such as Cheras, Pandya and Chola. And on through Sri Lanka and the Bay of Bengal, as far as Funan in present-day South Vietnam and into China, at the eastern end of the Silk Road. The Han dynasty in China traded indirectly with the Romans, either on the caravan route through Central Asia to India, the Persian Gulf and finally to the eastern Mediterranean, or on the maritime route, from the South China Sea, Indian Ocean, Persian Gulf, Arabian Sea and the Red Sea is as far away as Alexandria and Rome. The Southeast Asian archipelago with its medicines, spices and aromatic substances, precious wood and tortoise shells is an important link in the vast trading network and interconnection of the continent. With the fall of Constantinople to Ottoman Turkey in 1453, the road to Asia became much more difficult and dangerous. Portuguese navigators tried to find sea routes to Asia. In 1470, the Florentine astronomer, Paulo dal Pozo Toscanelli, proposed to the King of Portugal Afonso V that sailing west would be a faster way to reach the Spice Islands, Cathay, China, and Sapangu, Japan, than the route around Africa. Afonso rejected the proposal. The Portuguese explorers, under the leadership of King John II, then paved the way to Asia by sailing around Africa. Great progress in this pioneering was made in 1488, when Bartholomew Dias reached the Cape of Good Hope, in what is now South Africa. Meanwhile, around 1480, the Columbus brothers decided to choose Toscanelli's proposal and proposed a plan to reach the Indies, later interpreted to include all of South and East Asia, by sailing west across the ocean of the sea, that is, the Atlantic. During their first voyage in 1492, instead of arriving in Japan as intended, Columbus instead reached the New World, landing on an island in the Bahamas which he named San Salvador. On the next 3 trips, Columbus reached the islands of the Great and Minor Antilles, as well as the coasts of the Caribbean Sea in Venezuela and Central America, claiming them all as the Crown of Castile. Portugal was the first European power to open up lucrative Southeast Asian maritime trade routes, with the conquest of the Sultanate of Malacca in 1511. The Netherlands and Spain followed suit and soon replaced Portugal as the main European power in the region. In 1599, Spain began to colonize the Philippines. In 1619, acting through the East India Company, VOC, the Dutch took control of the city of Sunda Kelapa and renamed it Batavia, now Jakarta, as a base for trade and expansion to other areas in Java and the surrounding area. In 1641, the Dutch took over Malacca from the Portuguese. Economic opportunities attracted Chinese seafarers to the region in large numbers. In 1775, the Lanfang Republic, perhaps the first republic in the region, was founded in West Kalimantan as a river state under the Qing Empire. This republic lasted until 1884, after falling under Dutch occupation and the influence of the Qing Empire waning. The British, masquerading as the Honourable East India Company led by Josiah Child, had little interest or influence in the region, and were effectively expelled after losing the Siamese-British War in 1687. England, under the guise of the British East India Company, turned their attention. They went to the Bay of Bengal after concluding a peace agreement with France and Spain in 1783. During the conflict, Britain had a naval advantage over France, and needed a proper port. Penang Island has been under the territory of the Government of India under Francis Light. In 1786, settlements were formed under the rule of Sir John Macpherson, who officially began British expansion into the Malay areas of Southeast Asia. Britain also temporarily owned Dutch territory during the Napoleonic Wars, and territories of Spain in the Seven Years' War. In 1819, Stamford Raffles established Singapore as a major trading post for Britain in competition with the Dutch. However, their rivalry cooled down in 1824 when the Anglo-Dutch Treaty defined the boundaries of their power in Southeast Asia. British rule in Burma began after its victory in war with Burma, 1824-1826. Long before the era of global positioning satellites and multispectrum orthophotography, ancient cartographers often had to rely on word of mouth to describe distant places. Sometimes, they drew sea monsters on the map to fill in the empty spaces. Other times, they enlarge the size of a place on the map after hearing the fuller, and add their own details. When early mapmakers painted the Earth's surface in maps, they only drew geographical features based on what they saw or what tourists and explorers told them about. Because so little is known about the world, the information displayed on maps is rather sparse and it is difficult to evaluate the quality or accuracy of the map. In fact, most of the maps made before the European Renaissance were so general and inaccurate, that the mapmakers assumed we lived on a flat Earth and almost made no difference in their uses. Hecataeus, a scientist from Miletus, probably composed the first writings on geography around 500 BC. A generation later, Herodotus developed it from a wider range of studies and travels. As a historian with geographic inclination, Herodotus, among other things, records the early Phoenician circumcision of the African continent. He also improved the depiction of the shape and area of the world that became known later, and he also stated that the Caspian was an inland sea, contradicting the prevailing view of the time being part of the North Ocean. Although Hecataeus considered the Earth to be a flat disk surrounded by the sea, Herodotus and his followers questioned the concept and proposed a number of other possible shapes. In fact, the philosophers and scientists of the time seemed to have been busy for several years with discussions about the nature and extent of the world. Some modern scientists attribute the first hypothesis to the spherical shape of the Earth to Pythagoras, 6th century BC, or Parmenides, 5th century. The idea gradually developed into a consensus over the years. In general, by the middle of the 4th century, the theory of the spherical Earth was well accepted among Greek scientists, and around 350 BC Aristotle formulated 6 arguments to prove that the Earth was actually a sphere. Since that time, the idea of a spherical Earth has been generally accepted among geographers and other scientists. Around 300 BC, Dicaearchus, a pupil of Aristotle, placed the orientation line on the world map, running east and west through Gibraltar and Rhodes. Eratosthenes, Marinus Tyre and Ptolemy respectively developed the principle of the reference line to a fairly comprehensive system of parallels and meridians, and a method of projecting them. Eratosthenes, 276-194 BC, illustrates the world map better, combining information from the campaigns of Alexander the Great and his successors. Asia is becoming wider, reflecting a new understanding of true size. Eratosthenes was also the first geographer to incorporate parallels and meridians in his cartographic drawings, proving his understanding of the spherical nature of the Earth. Posidonius, ca. 150-130 BC, work On the Sea and Its Surroundings, is a general geographical discussion, showing how all forces have an impact on one another and apply to human life as well. He measures the circumference of the Earth with reference to the position of the star Canopus. Its size is 240,000 stadia, which translates to 24,000 miles, close to its true circumference. Posidonius, ca. 150-130 BC, work On the Sea and Its Surroundings, is a general geographical discussion, showing how all forces have an impact on one another and apply to human life as well. He measures the circumference of the Earth with reference to the position of the star Canopus. Its size is 240,000 stadia, which translates to 24,000 miles, close to the actual circumference of 24,901 miles. He took this approach from Eratosthenes, who a century earlier used the altitude of the Sun at different latitudes. The circumference of the Earth by the two men is extraordinarily accurate, because each compensates for errors in their measurements. However, the version of Posidonius' calculation popularized by Strabo was revised by fixing the distance between Rhodes and Alexandria to 3,750 stadia, resulting in the circumference of 180,000 stadia, or 18,000 miles. Ptolemy discussed and liked Posidonius' revised measure of Eratosthenes in Geographia, and scientists during the Middle Ages split into two camps regarding the circumference of the Earth, one side identifying from Eratosthenes' calculations and the other with Posidonius' size of 180.00 stadia. Depending on the stadia values used, it may be true that Posidonius, in an attempt to improve Eratosthenes, estimated the size of the Earth to be smaller, later copied by Ptolemy, and then spread to Renaissance Europe. Definition of India. In medieval Europe, the concept of the Three India was in general circulation. Greater India is the southern part of South Asia, India Minor is the northern part of South Asia, and Central India is the region surrounding Ethiopia. The term Greater India, Portuguese, India Maior, was used at least from the mid-15th century. The term, which appears to have been used with varying precision, sometimes means only the Indian subcontinent. Europe uses various terms related to South Asia to designate the South Asian peninsula, including Upper India, Greater India, Outer India, and Aquosa India. However, in some sense, European sea voyages, Greater India, or Major India, was extended from the Malabar coast, now Kerala, to India extra Gangam, India beyond the Ganges, and generally the Indies or Indies, i.e., the present-day Southeast Asian archipelago, and India Minor from Malabar to Sindh. Furthermore, India sometimes covers all of present-day Southeast Asia and sometimes only parts of the mainland. In geography at the end of the 19th century, Great India was referred to as Hindustan, northwest subcontinent, which included the Punjab, Himalayas and extended eastward to Indochina, including Burma, parts of Indonesia, namely the Sunda Islands, Kalimantan and Sulawesi, and the Philippines. German atlases sometimes distinguish Vorder Indian, anterior India, as the South Asian peninsula and Hinter Indian as Southeast Asia. Taprobana Island. Taprobana, under the name land of Antichthones, or land opposite, has long been seen as anotherworldly. The name was completely unknown in Europe before Alexander the Great attacked India in 327 BC. The writers who spoke of Taprobana were Onesicritus, Eratosthenes, Megasthenes, Hipparchus, Strabo, and Pliny. There are two distinct periods in which Taprobana is mentioned, and the third period when the place, including its name, has been completely forgotten. The first period is by early and ancient writers from the time of Alexander the Great to the Emperor Claudius. This period includes preaching by Onesicritus, Megasthenes and Pliny. They all use no other name than Taprobana. The second period covers the period from Ptolemy to Cosmas Indicopleustes. About 20 years after Alexander's death, Megasthenes was sent as ambassador by Emperor Seleucus Nicator to Sandracatus, Chandragupta Maurya, in 302 BC. From the information obtained at the Sandracatus Palace, Megasthenes described Taprobana as a very fertile island divided by a river. One part was filled with wild beasts and elephants, and the other was inhabited by the Prachi colonists, producing gold and gems. Eratosthenes also reported the dimensions of the island, namely 7,000 stadia in length and 5,000 stadia in width. He also stated that there are no cities, but villages with the number of 700. The island is located in the East Sea and is far across from Great India, on the east and west sides. The island used to be 20 days navigable from the Prasi country, at a time when navigation was limited to ships made of papyrus to cross the Nile, but later on, it was navigable for no more than 7 days of voyage, referring to the speed their ship construction could attain. According to Pliny, during the reign of Claudius 4154 AD, a free slave, Annius Plocamus, who was farming for the cash of the Red Sea, while sailing around Arabia was carried away by strong winds from the north of Carmania. Within 15 days he was stranded in Hippuri, a port in Taprobana, where he could be received humanely and with respect to be welcomed by the king, and it took him 6 months to learn their language. Moreover, the king was deeply impressed by the character of the Roman people, as shown by the fact that the dinars owned by the free slaves were all the same weight, although the distinctly different pictures show that they had experienced the rule of several emperors. He remained there for a while longer, then invited several people to get acquainted with his government. He finally brought a messenger to be sent to Rome, which consisted of 4 people led by Rakia. Strabo gathered a lot of detailed information from the messenger. On Taprobana there are 500 towns and villages, there is a port facing south, and it is bordered by the city of Polysimondus, one of the 10 most famous cities on the island, where the king lived, and has a population of 200,000 people. There is a lake in the interior called Megaspa, its circumference is 375 miles, from which the river called Polysimondus originates, which flows through the city of the same name, consisting of 3 channels, the narrowest being 5 stadia wide, the widest being 15. And another, his name was Sidera, to the north towards the coast of Great India. There are corals, pearls and precious stones, fertile soil, the person has a long life span of more than 100 years. There is trade with mainland China. The king wore a costume like Father Liber. Their festival is celebrated with hunting, the most popular of which are hunting tigers and elephants. The land is tilled with care. Grapes are not cultivated there, but other fruits are very abundant. They are very fond of fishing, and especially in catching turtles, so large that under their shells can the inhabitants, who live 100 years, spend most of their time hunting tigers and elephants, and fishing, especially catching turtles, whose shells are so large they are used as their home. The messengers made the surprising statement that they could see the northern stars, and the sun rose on the left and set on the right. The closest point to the coast of Great India is a peninsula known as the Kaliakam, a 4-day voyage, and in the middle of them is the Island of the Sun. The sea is greenish in color, has many trees, corals growing at the bottom, where the rudder of the ship can get caught when it hits it while sailing on it. The sea that lies between the island and the mainland is often shallow, not more than 6 steps deep, but at certain points the depth was so great that no anchor could ever reach the bottom. For this reason his ships were made with bows at both ends. So it won't run aground while going through this channel, which is very narrow. The tonnage of this ship is 3,000 amphorae. In their crossing of the sea the people of Taprobana did not observe the stars, and indeed they did not see the star of the Great Bear. But they took the birds out to sea, which they let fly from time to time, and just followed them as they were going ashore. They only use 4 months of the year for shipping activities, and are very careful and unsure of themselves at sea for the next 100 days after the summer sun turns around, which is when the sea is in the middle of winter.